the locker wasn't supposed to exist, and what was inside it wasn't supposed to be opened. Hi, my name is Emily Thompson. I'm 34 years old and I work as a financial compliance officer in Denver. 2 months ago, my grandmother passed away. We thought we knew everything about her life. We were wrong. My grandmother, Margaret Maggie Thompson, was the kind of woman who labeled spice jars and balanced checkbooks down to the penny. She lived quietly in Boulder for over 40 years, widowed at 52, church on Sundays, family dinners every other weekend. Predictable, steady, transparent, or so we believed. After her funeral, while sorting through her paperwork, I found a key taped to the inside of an old cookbook. No label, just a small brass key and a note that read, Locker 317. That was it. No explanation, no sentiment, just a number. At first, we assumed it was an old storage unit, but after calling around, we discovered it belonged to a safety deposit box at First National Bank of Colorado in Boulder. The account was solely in her name. No beneficiary listed. That surprised all of us. Grandma shared everything, or so we thought. A week later, my father, my Aunt Linda, and I sat in a small private office at the bank. The air felt heavier than necessary. The bank manager slid the metal box across the table. Only the listed individual could access this, she said gently. Until now? My father cleared his throat. Probably old bonds, he muttered. I wasn't so sure. Something about the note, the simplicity of it, felt intentional. Like she wanted it found, but not easily. The box clicked open. No jewelry, no cash, no property deeds, just a thick manila envelope. And inside it, 3 DNA test reports, official, stamped, certified. The room went silent. My aunt frowned. What is this? I skimmed the first page. It was a paternity test result dated 1992. My father's name listed as the subject. The alleged father, Robert Thompson, my grandfather. Result, 0% probability of paternity. My stomach dropped. My father laughed nervously. That's ridiculous, he said. Must be a mistake. But there were 2 more reports. One from 2005, one from 2018. Different labs, same result. My grandfather was not his biological father. The silence that followed felt like the floor had disappeared. My father's face drained of color. That's impossible, he whispered, but printed facts don't bend for comfort. My Aunt Linda grabbed the second report. Her hands trembled. What about me? She asked sharply. There was a 4th page clipped behind the others. Another test. Her name? Result? 99.9% probability of paternity, Robert Thompson confirmed. The air changed instantly. Not just confusion now. Division? My father stood abruptly. So I'm what he snapped. Adopted, lied to. No one had answers. The envelope contained only results, no explanation, no letter, no apology, just data. Cold, political, unforgiving. Back home in Boulder, the house felt different. Like the walls knew something we didn't. I went into Grandma's bedroom, opened her closet, touched her neatly hung dresses, trying to reconcile the woman I knew with the secret she carried. Because here's what didn't make sense. Grandpa loved my father deeply. There was no difference in treatment, no coldness, no distance. If he knew, he never showed it. If he didn't know, then Grandma had lived with a truth that could have shattered everything. That night, my father called me. His voice sounded smaller. Do you think Dad knew? He asked quietly. I didn't know how to answer. If he didn't, he continued, then Mom lied to both of us. Silence stretched between us. And if he did, he added slowly, then he chose me anyway. That possibility felt different. Not betrayal. Choice. But we didn't have proof. Only results? And a sentence about timing. The next day, I searched through Grandma's old files again. And I found something I hadn't noticed before. A faded photograph tucked inside a Bible, a man I didn't recognize. Young, standing beside Grandma in what looked like a 1960s diner. They weren't touching, but their closeness felt intimate. On the back of the photo was a name. Daniel Harper, summer 1967. My father was born in March 1968. The math didn't require explanation. When I showed the photo to my aunt, she gasped. I've never seen him before. Neither had I. Grandma had erased him from every album. Except this one hidden image. The man who might be my father's biological father. The man who existed only in a locker. That evening, my father came over. I handed him the photograph. He stared at it for a long time. Is that him? He whispered. I nodded slowly. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He just looked displaced. Like someone whose reflection no longer matched the mirror. My whole identity, he murmured. And that's when I understood. This wasn't just about infidelity. It was about identity. Blood, belonging, and timing. Why did Grandma keep the results? Why test 3 separate times over decades? Why confirm the truth again in 2018, just 8 years before she died? And why leave it hidden yet findable? I'll tell you what we uncovered about Daniel Harper, and whether my grandfather knew the truth all along, because sometimes, family isn't destroyed by secrets. It's redefined by them. If this story is pulling you in, stay with me. Because what we discovered next changed not just who we were, but who we chose to be. The name on the back of the photo wasn't familiar, but somehow, it felt like it had always been waiting for us. Hi, my name is Emily Thompson. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a financial compliance officer in Denver. You know, we found a hidden bank locker after my grandmother, Margaret Maggie Thompson, passed away. Inside weren't jewels or cash. There were DNA test results proving my grandfather was not my father's biological father. And a single photograph. A man named Daniel Harper. After the shock settled into something quieter, heavier, I did what I do best. I investigated. Not emotionally. Methodically. I started with public records in Boulder, marriage certificates, property records, old city directories. There was no Daniel Harper listed as living at my grandmother's address in 1967. But I did find something else. A business license application from that year. Daniel Harper, owner of a small auto repair shop, 3 blocks from the diner in the photograph. My father was born 8 months later. The timeline didn't need imagination. When I showed my father the records, he stared at the address. I remember that garage, he whispered. You do? I asked. He nodded slowly. Dad used to take the car there. I was maybe 5 or 6. My chest tightened. You met him. I don't know, he said. I remember a man with dark hair giving me a lollipop once. Silence swallowed the room. What if the truth had been standing inches away from him his entire childhood? We needed to know if Daniel Harper was still alive. A quick search led to an obituary from 2 years ago. Daniel Harper passed away at 81. Survived by 1 daughter. Name, Claire Harper. Location, Fort Collins. My pulse quickened. If Daniel was my father's biological father, then Claire was his half-sister, a family we never knew existed. My father didn't want to call. He said he needed time. But time had already stolen decades. So I reached out. I sent a carefully worded email explaining that we'd discovered information suggesting a biological connection. I didn't mention betrayal or secrets, just facts. 3 days later, Claire responded. Her message was short. I think we need to talk. We drove to Fort Collins that Saturday. The tension in the car felt electric. My father barely spoke. He stared out the window like a man bracing for impact. Claire met us at a quiet cafe downtown. She looked like a stranger, but not entirely. There was something about her eyes, the shape of her jaw, that made my father freeze mid. It was like looking into a mirror from a different timeline. She didn't waste time. My dad told me once, she began carefully. He said there was someone he loved before my mother, someone he lost. My father's hands tightened on the table. He never named her. Claire continued. But he said she chose stability over him. That word echoed loudly. My grandfather, Robert Thompson, had a steady job, a house reliability. Daniel had a small garage and uncertainty. Grandma had chosen stability, but not necessarily love. Claire pulled out a small box. Inside were old letters. From 1967, signed simply M. My father's breath caught. They weren't explicit, but they were intimate. They spoke of difficult decisions, of timing, of responsibility. One line stood out. I can't build a life on hope. I need something solid. Grandma's handwriting was unmistakable. She had loved Daniel, but she chose my grandfather, and 8 months later, my father was born. Did your dad know? I asked softly. Claire hesitated. He suspected, she admitted, but she cut contact after she got engaged. He told me once that if she ever needed him, he'd come. My father closed his eyes, so he knew I existed. Claire nodded slowly. He said there was a boy, but he didn't want to disrupt your life. The room fell silent. This wasn't a scandal. It was sacrifice. On multiple sides, the biggest question still lingered. Did my grandfather know? That answer came unexpectedly. When we returned home, my aunt found something hidden in Grandpa's old toolbox. A sealed envelope addressed to my father, never opened. Dated 1993, the same year as the first DNA test. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Handwritten, my son, blood makes biology. Choice makes family. I've known since 1992. Nothing changes. Signed, Dad? My father broke down completely, because the man he thought had been deceived had actually chosen him. Knowingly, fully, without resentment, suddenly the locker made sense. Grandma didn't hide the truth to destroy us. She preserved it until the people involved were gone. She protected her husband's dignity, Daniel's peace, my father's childhood, and when the time was right, she left the truth. Not in anger, not in confession, but in documentation. Truth deserves timing, not chaos. Now I understood, but the story wasn't finished, because there was one more revelation waiting inside that locker. A final DNA report dated 2018. And it wasn't about my father. It was about me. I'll tell you what that result revealed, and how one hidden truth didn't destroy our family. It expanded it. If this story is holding your attention, stay with me. Because identity isn't just inherited, Sometimes it's uncovered. Hi, my name is Emily Thompson. I'm 34 years old and I work as a financial compliance officer in Denver. If you've followed this story, you know my grandmother left a hidden bank locker at First National Bank of Colorado. Inside were DNA results, proving my grandfather wasn't my father's biological parent. We discovered a man named Daniel Harper and a half-sister in Fort Collins. We learned my grandfather knew the truth and chose my father anyway. We thought that was the end. It wasn't. At the bottom of the envelope was one final report dated 2018. Subject: Emily Thompson. I remember staring at my own name, feeling something unfamiliar. Fear? Why would Grandma test me? Without telling me? The results section was simple. Paternal lineage consistent with Daniel Harper. It confirmed what we already suspected, that my biological grandfather was Daniel. But that wasn't the shocking part. Attached to the report was a handwritten note from Grandma. Emily, you always asked the hardest questions. I wanted you to have answers when I couldn't give them. That line unraveled me. She didn't do this to expose anyone. She did it because she knew I would look. And she wanted me to find clarity, not rumors. When I showed my father, he was quiet for a long time. Does this change anything for you? I asked him carefully. He looked at me with red, steady eyes. No, he said firmly. Your grandfather is still my father, and I am still yours. That was the moment I realized something powerful. Identity isn't erased by biology. It's layered, expanded, complicated, but not erased. A week later, we invited Claire, our newly discovered relative, to dinner in Boulder. The same house where secrets once lived in silence. Now it was filled with open conversation. Claire brought old photographs of Daniel. One picture made my breath catch. He had my smile. The exact tilt. The same dimple on the left side. Genetics whispered where history had been silent. But instead of anger, I felt curiosity. And something softer. Connection. Over dinner, Claire shared stories about her father. He never married until later in life, she said. I think he never really got over your grandmother. There was no bitterness in her tone. Just acceptance. My father listened carefully. I'm not angry, he said finally. I just wish I had known him. Claire reached across the table and squeezed his hand. He knew about you. And he chose not to interfere. That was his way of loving you. Another form of restraint? Another quiet sacrifice. That night after everyone left, I sat alone in the living room. The same room where we once believed we were a perfectly simple family. We weren't simple. We were layered. My grandmother loved one man, chose another, carried the consequences quietly. My grandfather knew, chose fatherhood anyway. Daniel knew, chose distance instead of disruption. And my father grew up fully loved, even if not fully informed. No one tried to destroy anyone. They all tried to protect something. Dignity, stability, childhood, peace. The locker wasn't a weapon. It was timing. Months later, we visited Daniel's grave together. My father stood silently for several minutes. I don't know what to call you, he said softly, but thank you. There was no dramatic closure. No cinematic reconciliation. Just acknowledgement. And sometimes that's enough. Back home in Denver, I placed Grandma's note inside my own document safe. Not hidden, but preserved. I understand her now. Truth without timing creates chaos. Truth with care creates clarity. She waited until the people most vulnerable to the fallout were gone. Then she left us facts. Not accusations. Not emotional confessions. Just evidence. And trusted us to handle it like adults. Our family didn't collapse. It expanded. Holidays now include Claire and her children. There are new faces at the table. New similarities noticed, new stories told, and when someone jokes about inherited traits, we laugh a little differently, because we know inheritance isn't always visible. Sometimes it waits in a locker. If you're listening to this story and wondering whether hidden truth always destroys families, sometimes it forces honesty. Sometimes it deepens empathy. Sometimes it reveals how many people quietly chose love over ego. My grandmother didn't leave money in that locker. She left identity and the chance to decide what we would do with it. If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own family history, please like and subscribe. Because some truths don't break families. They redefine them. And sometimes, the most powerful inheritance isn't wealth. It's understanding.